Good, great. My name is Sinead, and I was asked about 35 minutes ago to introduce Chris, which is always lovely. He said, say whatever you want, which was dangerous, I think. Chris has got a very impressive bio. If you'd like to read it, it's just the page after the middle on the, on the program. He does lots of stuff. I've known him for a while. Yeah. I've known him for a while, and well, I live in Budapest and Chris lives in Dublin, and we don't get to see each other that often, but when we do get to see each other, a couple of things happen. I laugh hysterically when I hang out with Chris. Mostly at you, yeah. No. I always have a good time hanging out with Chris. He's a very good mate, I have to say. It's a great pleasure to get to spend time with him. And I think one of the big reasons is because when I talk to Chris, I always really feel like Chris is listening to me. Shut up, I'm being genuine. It's supposed to be a moment I was having there, yeah? No, I actually always feel like Chris is actually really listening to what I'm saying. And I think this is one of the reasons why this talk is going to be interesting, because I think that in Chris's profession, he actually really listens to what people around him have to say. And a lot of people talk about bottom-up teacher development and teacher-centered teacher development, but in a lot of cases, I think that it's lip service people pay to it. And I don't think that that's the case with Chris. You're welcome. No. So I'm going to set you a challenge just before I hand Chris the microphone. I'm going to set you a challenge, which is whether you're in management or whether you're a teacher or whether you're a student or whatever it is that you're doing. Chris is going to be presenting a particular model of teacher development and some particular things that he's done in his context. My challenge for you is to think how what he's presenting might work for you in your context. So I feel very confident that you're going to take something practical away from this talk. Are you frantically rewriting it in your head? Yeah. Best of luck, Chris Farrell.
Thank you very much. Cheers. That was actually half my talk that Sinead just did there. You may have noticed from Sinead's accent that we both speak a non-standard variety of English. So if you have any confusion, if you can't understand me at all, please just raise your... Oh, you can't understand me. Just raise your hand and I will stop and explain a little bit more. This is an hour-long plenary, but we're going to make it a bit workshop-y as well, so you will have to talk to people. I apologize. You will have to talk to the people beside you. And to start off, we're looking at the concept of bottom-up teacher development, and I just want you, with the person beside you, to chat about what is your understanding of bottom-up teacher development. What is it? What do you know of it? I'll give you 1 minute, please. So maybe you've chatted about bottom-up teacher development being a range of different things and a range of different activities that teachers may do within their own context in order to take control of their own development. Dorothy talks this morning about the need for teachers to always develop, and the idea of bottom-up teacher development does put a lot of pressure on teachers to constantly be thinking, how can I develop? Basically, what I'm going to talk about is different strategies and programs that we have done in the UK and Ireland in the past 5 years, I suppose, in order to try and promote something like bottom-up teacher development or a blended program of bottom-up and top-down teacher development. Alternative title was just throw enough mud at the wall and see what sticks, because basically in your school or as a teacher, you're probably trying more and more things and thinking, does this work? Is this appropriate? Is this useful? If you're a teacher trainer, if you're a manager, maybe you're dealing with staff and dealing with teachers and thinking, how can I best provide and keep these teachers happy and make their job easier. And if you're a teacher, you're probably thinking, well, how can I just make my life easier, and how can I ensure that I'm providing the best for my students? So we all try different things, and we're recommended different things, and some of them work for us, some of them don't work for us, some of them are not really measurable, and we're going to look at some of these things today. So a little caveat. The teachers in my context are all weird teachers, so it's perhaps similar for your context and perhaps different. Some of the strategies and programs that we have implemented and we have done have worked for us, but they might not work for you depending on your context. So this isn't definitive, and I want you to be able to think, that's not for us, that might work for me, whatever. The first kind of concept I want to look at is the idea of negotiated teacher development, and this idea of a bottom-up and top-down concept. And the idea that the top-down is the school or the trainers or the management providing training for the teachers, and the bottom-up one is teachers taking control of their own reflection and development, and how the majority of institutions will look at some sort of negotiation between the two, where the institution will have some training, but they also will promote some reflection and inquiry, ideally. If you're a teacher, maybe in freelance, you're essentially in control of all of your own development, so you maybe have no overarching institution, or maybe you're the member of a accreditation body or something like that, which would look after that. Click. No. Well, that's it. We can finish. I wanted to click. Oh, yeah. So we're going to look at 5 things, if it will let me. Second thing we're going to look at is the big concept of culture change. And this was really relevant in my context because when I became head of teacher development, there wasn't exactly a standardized teacher development program. And the idea of teacher development was very much from the institution. The institution was in charge of all of the development. The institution was the body which knew everything and drove teachers in the correct direction. We introduced this concept of obviously culture change and trying to encourage teachers to take control of their own development and to start to reflect upon what kind of teacher they are. And we're going to look at the idea of nudge points, or small little changes that you can make within your own context in order to promote a culture of quality, I suppose, within your staff room. Yeah. We're going to also look at mentoring. This was one of the most important things, I think, which we implemented. And it's the idea of, after you finish, for example, in the UK and Ireland, it's a 4-week CELTA, 4-week preparatory training course. In a lot of cases, you're kind of pushed out into the world and you're never given any sort of real support anymore. So it's the idea of having post-training course mentoring as a standardized thing and having it throughout the career as well, not just for the first few months. The fourth one that we're going to look at is a little bit more complex. It's a curriculum development to frame teacher development a little bit more clearer. That's hopefully going to hit you in about 40 minutes when you're really tired, so I'm looking forward to that. And then the final one is reflective inquiry. And obviously reflective inquiry goes throughout it, and it's going to be something which we promote and we encourage as much as possible. Okay, whoa. It sometimes clicks a little bit and then clicks loads. So what we want to really look at is teacher development as an ethos, not as an activity. Okay? The idea that I've done a workshop, therefore I am developed, is not really appropriate in the modern world. We're looking at the idea of teacher development, and not only in the academic sense, but also in the holistic sense of teachers are empowered to be the best they can be. Their job is easy for them because they know what they're doing, and the students are satisfied. That's really what we want to look at. So the first thing we had to look at was, I think I'm just going to stand up there and click, it's much easier, the difference between bottom-up and top-down teacher development, and there's been a huge amount written about this. There's a couple of key differences that we want to clarify between bottom-up and top-down. Obviously, teacher training, this idea of top-down, is a preset structure, involves transmission of information, so therefore an expert or an expert leader, a teacher, a trainer. Typically has a professional function. It's one-off, workshop every few weeks or something like that. And it has an authoritarian structure in it, I suppose. On the other hand, teacher development in its purest form should be a process, and the personal processing of knowledge, so not this one-size-fits-all. It should be focused on the holistic whole person, and it should be ongoing and democratic. So ideally, what we're looking at in terms of our teacher development events is as much of that as possible while maintaining efficacy. Does that make sense? 4 key areas when we look at teacher development events, our criteria is it must be continuous or continuing. The responsibility must be on the practitioner, so on the teacher. The responsibility for development can't be on the institution, because then the institution is going to try to create the type of teachers that it wants, rather than encouraging the teacher to be the type of teacher that they want to be. It needs to be needs-driven, so if it is needs-driven, then we need to understand what are the needs of the teacher in their particular context. If they've been teaching for 1 year or 20 years, obviously they're going to have different particular set of needs. And it's going to be evaluative, not descriptive, which is another key area. 4 of the kind of deadly sins, and we realized that we had been doing a lot of these, we had a lot of pitfalls in our teacher development program, was the concept of passivity, and this obviously transmission of information leads to passivity within the teachers, because they think, oh, they're going to tell me what to do, and I'm going to do it, rather than I have to actually think, what do I need to do? The concept of superficiality, if you get a 1-hour training session on pronunciation, you never have to worry about pronunciation again, because you've done the hour, you've done the training, everything's fine. The idea of teachers only working alone and not collaborating and cooperating. We promote this idea of reciprocal vulnerability, where teachers actually try to think, what do I need to work on? How can I best help other people, and how can I best be helped, perhaps? And the idea of overconfidence, which we are overcoming. So most recently, Richardson and Diaz-Maggioli have created this INSPIRE model for evaluating teacher development events. And this is what we look at, the concept of not teacher development sessions or workshop, but a teacher development event. And what does a teacher development event encompass from the institution's perspective? So from the institution, they want to be able to plan teacher development, they want to be able to evaluate teacher development, they want to be able to put money into effective teacher development. And obviously the teacher wants to get the best they can do. So again, we have this negotiated concept where the teacher development events are evaluated by the institution based on certain models, and then the teacher is encouraged to participate as much as possible. So, with the person beside you, I want you to think of teacher development events that you have taken part in the past year. And I don't just mean training sessions or workshops, I mean things you have done in order to develop yourself as a teacher or develop within your profession, or a trainer or a manager. Really quickly with your partner. Really quickly. 1 minute. You still with me? Which events have you done? What have you taken part in? Yeah. It's a lot of the kind of transmission stuff. You take part. Yeah. Good workshops. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Sorry. Anybody want to volunteer? Any particular answers? So we get workshops. I think a lot of people have workshops, conferences. Is there anything else that you have done which you'd say, yeah, that's a teacher development event? Reading. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Teaching different groups, levels, purposes, so challenging yourself to actually try and learn about different groups. Perfect. Yep. So what we're going to look at, we're going to go into some of the different teacher development events that teachers do or the schools encourage. But first, we're going to kind of anchor everything in. Mamma mia. Oh. We're going to anchor everything in 5 key nudge points, which we look at in implementing these events personally and also from an institutional perspective. So 5 key changes, I suppose, that we make within an institution. Okay. First thing to look at is ethos, school ethos. So maybe your school has a certain way of doing things, an agenda, a set of ideas, a culture. Maybe it's good for you, maybe it's bad for you. But I just want you really quickly with your partner to answer the question, what is your school culture? What is your school interested in? To make it easy, I'll give you a general dichotomy. Is your school more interested in quality or quantity? Quick question. You can answer with your partner or silently in your head if you want. Okay. So maybe your school has an amazing culture of development and it focuses individually on every teacher and every student to try and ensure there's a lasting and positive relationship with the school. Maybe. In which case you can chill, you can kind of sleep for the next 10 minutes. The majority of teachers and managers and trainers will say, yeah, sometimes the school is like this and sometimes it's like this and we fight this fight and we try to do this, and all the time perhaps we're trying to promote an easier life for everybody and more quality in our efforts. So we're going to look a little bit at these little changes that we can make and how we can take control of change management. There's a couple of key tips in change management. We're going to go over them kind of superficially. There's a fair amount of content, so don't write anything. Email me and I'll just send you all the slides. It's just easier. We're looking at the idea that sustained improvement in an institution must come from system changes, must come from the school actually implementing a change in system. Superficial changes last temporarily, but unless there is a systematic change, it will not last changes in personnel, which is very, very key. As we said, change is led from the top. There must be collective meaning and commitment. There must be buy-in from everyone. If there's buy-in from everyone, there must be some sort of negotiation around what is the best school culture, what school culture we are. One thing which we found out very clearly is that there's usually, when you get buy-in and when you implement change, there's a big change and everyone's on board, and then there's not. There's an implementation dip. Maybe there's a drop in quality, maybe there's a drop in quantity or something. So we are looking at long-term sustainable change and how that can be implemented. And then redefining resistance as a potential positive. Lovely. Okay, so we're looking at 5 particular structure changes, nudges that we're going to make. So we've got 5 of them. And I'm going to go through some of the teacher development events that you can implement and how these nudges can be used within a teacher development program. The first 3, we've got pre-commitment strategies. And these are ways of having people commit to involvement in teacher development events before they happen. So what does that look like? So say, for example, institutionally, we've got training workshops every 2 weeks. And one of the plans we had for the training workshop is that you sign up. You sign the sheet and you can join the training workshops. But now what we have is an opt-out sheet. So you have to sign the page if you don't want to go. So you are pre-committed. The institution has committed you to that training session, so you have to come to it unless you've got a good excuse. And as a result, the numbers of attendance are massively up. Now that's from an institutional perspective. Maybe the teachers don't want to go to the workshops for some reason or not, but from the institutional perspective, we have kind of guaranteed participation in that. A pre-commitment strategy is also a promise to try and be somewhere in 2 months. For example, you're reading a book as a teacher development event, so you promise me that in 2 months you're going to do a presentation on that book. It's on the calendar, so you have to read the book now. So pre-commitment strategies have been pretty useful. Visual reminders, oral reminders, email reminders, personalized email reminders, really, really useful as part of a teacher development strategy to remind people of things that they should be doing and things that are going on. Posters, for example, are crucial. Smart disclosure, honest dialogue and transparency. So being able to have that reciprocal vulnerability and the manager being able to say to the teacher, this is what I think your strengths are, this is what I think your weaknesses are, these are areas I think you need to improve, these are the areas I think you might be interested in improving, for example. Creating smaller nudge units, and we're going to look at professional development groups, action research programs, and things like that, where you do have these vanguard of teachers or trainers who are very interested in their own development, and they're able to create that culture within their own group and to promote it, I suppose. And then finally, making things as easy and convenient as possible. Making things easy to do. So for example, if you want teachers to research, give them the research material. If you want teachers to be able to do reflective inquiry in class, tailor the reflective inquiry process, train them how to do it, rather than just say, I hope they do it. So make things as easy and convenient as possible. What does that look like? What does that look like? So the first three are easily implementable in a mentoring strategy. Pre-commitment strategies, oral reminders, and smart disclosures are all key components of any mentoring strategy. I want to ask you a question about when you started teaching. So perhaps you did your preparatory training course, you did your initial training, and then when you first landed in a school, when you first landed in an institution, what support was given to you? What training were you given? At any point were you told to reflect upon your teaching? And how did that make you feel? So just quickly with the person beside you, what support did you receive in the initial stages of your career in terms of mentoring? Just a minute with your partner. It's okay if it's none. Yeah. I feel like the answer is none for everybody. Very little. Was anybody actually mentored? Formally mentored? You were? For how long? Half a year, wow. 90 minutes a week for half a year. Were you in a state school, one-to-one? Do you want to name the name and not shame, whatever the other one is? Who is it? ILC? Okay, good. Big kudos to them. I guess the majority of people received very little training, very little support. There was obviously workshops maybe for the whole staff, but probably you were trained and then thrown into a classroom and you were told, now you are teacher. Go and teach. This seems to be pretty common. So when we started looking at a lot of the issues surrounding perhaps teachers' discontent or teachers' stagnation was around the fact that teachers were not encouraged to self-reflect and were not actually focused on as teachers in the first year of teaching. They were just told, go in, do the job, and then burn out, which is very, very common in the teaching profession. So a couple of things we had to look at initially were, well, what is a mentor? So we started saying, well, mentoring is great, let's do that, but what's the job of a mentor? A mentor has a huge amount of functions. How is that actually done, and what's the point of it? So we looked at the point of mentoring, and in my context, people do their preparatory training course, and then they're put into any number of these classes. So you do your preparatory training course, usually your CELTA. And then you're put in maybe to general English adults, or maybe to young learners, maybe to an EAP class, an ESP class, maybe a one-to-one, or maybe an exam, with no follow-up training on that particular type of class. So this is insane. In any other profession, it wouldn't be allowed. We need to focus on this institutional support, the training for self-reflection and self-study, rather than having people burn out and leave the profession, which is very, very common. So we don't have to worry about that. When we looked at considerations in mentoring, we started our mentoring program. Again, this was throw enough mud. We started trialing how can we mentor teachers. 90 minutes every week we did not do. We started thinking how can we do that, and a couple of things came up as barriers perhaps to mentoring or primary considerations in mentoring. The first one was the apprenticeship of observation bias. And this is just in short basically the bias that new teachers have from their own education, what they think a teacher should do, what they think a teacher should look like. And if anybody is, all of you I guess have been students, probably your teacher stood in the center and was the teacher, you know, the master of the class. So therefore their belief is that this is what the teacher should do, without considering, is that the best way I teach, or is it the best way to provide for my group? So that was a really big issue, the apprenticeship of observation bias. The idea of demonstrability of certain things. So a mentor can say, oh, maybe you should be doing this, or you could be doing that. And then the mentee will say, well, what does that look like? So then you have to build in reciprocal observations and things like that. The mentor cannot just say, the mentor must also do, probably. Focus on teachable moments, the areas that we can go step by step, rather than saying, no, this is where you should be. It's easier to say, well, perhaps try that next, or perhaps go in this direction. It has to be systematic, it has to be recorded, it has to be reflected upon. And this is not only from the institutional perspective, the institutional need for record keeping and saying, what's the point in mentoring a new teacher? Like, where is the record? How do I know the teacher is being mentored? And also, it's to put the focus for development back on the new teacher, because it's their career, it's their job. So you have to say to them, I want you to record some of the lessons you're learning, implement, and we can go on with that. It can't be for the mentor to take control of all of that. And then the final stage was utilizing a competency framework. There are about 50 different teacher competency frameworks, and there's a new one being written by the Council of Europe at the moment. Competency framework basically is it has a framework of skills, abilities, competencies, which a teacher should have at certain stages in their career. The one that we use is the Equals Teacher Development Framework. It follows 3 different particular stages in a career across a range of different areas. And the idea for this was being able to frame some of the competencies as reflective questions. By being able to say, in this area, you can ask yourself something about your classroom practice, and you can see this is where maybe you are based on your reflection, and the competency level 2 is perhaps where you should be, or where you could be. And this framework allows the institution and the teacher to be able to see some sort of progress in their general competencies. Not perfect. Obviously, teachers generally don't like competency frameworks because they feel like they're being judged against them. But it's really useful for the institution and be able to say, yeah. Sorry. Want to stand, or is this a kneeling thing? Yeah.
Just plugging the Cambridge Cambridge English and Nile Trainer Competency Framework. They have a parallel teacher competency framework, but since there are so many teacher trainers in the room, you might want to have a look at their trainer competency framework.
Is that free? So Cambridge Nile Trainer Competency Framework, those competency frameworks, what I found in using them is that if you just go on and look at that for a new teacher, for example, or a new trainer, it's too much information. But if you do it kind of step-by-step, digestible, so the Cambridge Nile one, really useful. So we looked at training mentors, and we'll just go through it really quickly, because the mentor has to be all of these things: language teacher, trainer, facilitator, counselor, guide, expert, impartial observer, diagnostician and assessor, motivator, and peer. So one of the keys to implementing a mentor program is not only considerations of what framework and the apprenticeship of observation, but actually who are your mentors? Who are your mentors? Are they properly trained? And are they able to do what you think they're able to do? Because if they're just teachers who've been there for a while, maybe they can't really do that. And if they're just trainers, not just trainers, but if they're trainers, then perhaps they're going to more focus on that top-down structure rather than encouraging the newer teacher to take control of their own development. Does that make sense? Makes sense to me. Two considerations when you implement a mentor program was that sometimes the newer teacher knows more than the mentor. Very important to remember. Sometimes the newer teacher actually has a greater knowledge in certain areas or is in some areas a better teacher than the mentor. Mentors don't like to hear that, but there can be certain cases that the mentor has to say, actually, you're probably right. And the second consideration was sometimes the mentor cares way too much about the mentee and really spoon feeds them all the way to the point where you get a teacher 3 months, 6 months into their profession and they need their mentor. The mentor should be trying to wean the newer teacher off training as much as possible. It's initial support, but not so much caring. 2 years ago, through English UK, when I was researching mentoring, I sent a survey out to English UK members, basically trying to figure out in the UK what mentoring systems are in place, what mentoring structure and systems are in place. I got about 22 replies. These are some of the questions. The results were a little bit scary, and I can imagine it's the same all over Europe. There was a lack of clarity over what exactly a mentor is. People weren't really sure if it was a trainer, if it was an academic manager, if it was a peer. There was very little systematic mentoring actually happening, very ad hoc in a lot of institutions. Mentors were typically ready-made, so it was just you're a teacher for a while, so you become a mentor, which isn't great. Very informal, typically the buddy system, which may be used in a lot of situations. This was interesting, and something that we've implemented was self-reflection questionnaires. On a lot of the preparatory training courses, they do encourage you to reflect upon your own teaching, but then once you start teaching, you never reflect again. So actually encouraging that self-reflection questionnaires and self-reflection throughout, I think, is essential. The onus for record keeping was on the mentee. The mentor has the control but no responsibility. Mentor is the first port of call for all questions, which was really good for academic management because it meant that they didn't have to deal with new teachers. They brought all of their questions to the mentor. Typically 3 months. You got for 6 months? 6 months, right. And then in a lot of cases, because trial periods were usually 3 months, the mentor frequently was the gateway to further employment. So the mentor was the person who said to the academic manager after 2 months, I'm not sure about this teacher. So it's not so much a positive relationship in that case when there's a knowledge that perhaps it's performance, there's a performance kind of grading, I suppose. One thing we've implemented as well in the past 2 years was senior teacher mentoring, personal improvement plans, PIPs. Where senior teachers, so teachers who are teaching 5, 10, 15, 20 years, are mentored. And it occurred to us that in a lot of other professions, you do get coaching throughout your career. Whereas in our profession, frequently, you do a formal training course, you do workshops, but there's very little one-to-one actual training that's not an appraisal or something like that. So we've implemented senior teacher training. We say senior teacher, they're just there a long time. It doesn't mean that they're more senior or not in terms of the structure of the company. But we're looking at the idea of ghost observations. So ghost observations were kind of the main vehicle which drives the senior teacher mentoring. And ghost observations are essentially an observation with no observer. So you have a pre-observation meeting, you agree on the criteria of the observation, the teacher teaches the lesson, and then they fill out the observation form for themselves, and then you have a post-observation meeting, and you sit down and chat about the goals of the lesson, where they achieved, how are they achieved. And the good thing about them is you can do as many of them a month as possible, and it's all just promoting self-reflection and encouraging them to actually take control of certain areas they might want to focus on. And they've been really useful in creating these teacher development, personal improvement plans for more experienced teachers. Yeah, so they've been useful. Okay, this is where it gets horribly complicated. One other area, when we started looking at how we can make our teacher development program more effective, one area which came up in observations again and again and again was that teachers weren't exactly sure what they were teaching. They didn't know what they wanted the students to do. They didn't know what they wanted the students to be able to do at the end of every lesson. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you. And I don't mean I want them to know the present simple, or I want them to be better at reading. They didn't know, particularly related to the CEFR, what they wanted the students to be able to do better, which behavior they wanted to be able to focus on, which competency they wanted to develop in each lesson. Therefore, they didn't know exactly why they were doing certain tasks. Frequently, they were following a course book, and the course book doesn't always focus exactly on the students. The course book is focusing on the course book. So we wanted to think, how can we begin to encourage teachers to reflect upon their own competencies and what they do in the classroom? So we wanted them to reflect upon success in the classroom, assessment of success in the classroom, and how they're bringing teachers in the direction of success in the classroom. Does that make sense to you? A little bit, even if it's one person. So what we did, and I'm not encouraging you to do this because it took a long time, was we completely rewrote our whole curriculum. So in general terms, we moved from a knowledge-based curriculum to a behavior-led curriculum. So rather than having lesson aims focusing on a language knowledge, our lesson aims were all focused on a learning outcome, which was stressed as a behavior. And I'll show you how that helps in some way. Oh yeah, do teachers know what they're teaching? So these were our three key areas that we wanted to look at. Do teachers know what they're teaching? Do they know the success criteria? So for example, if I'm doing a lesson and I want my students to be able to speak for 2 minutes about traveling using past simple, what is success in that lesson? So what do I actually want the students to be able to do? Do I want them all to be able to speak for 2 minutes? Probably not. I want you guys to speak for 2 minutes. I'm happy enough for 1 minute with you. I'm happy enough even for a little bit of talk from you. Because my success criteria is going to differ in the lesson based on the student. So it's focusing on that success criteria. John Hattie talks a lot about it in Visible Learning, on the concept of bringing success criteria into your lesson. And how am I going to assess the success? So is it as simple as I'm monitoring, or am I going to collect work, or whatever? So I wanted the teachers to think, what am I teaching? How do I feel like success is in that lesson, and how do I know? Okay. So, yeah, we have that already. So, for example, with your partners, I want you to think about this as a writing task. So this is your learning outcome in your lesson. You want the students to be able to write an essay on the advantages and disadvantages of living in a city. Okay? I want the students to be able to do this at the end of the lesson. I want you to consider quickly with your partner, what are your success criteria? Which of these would you choose as your success criteria? In other words, what do you actually want the students to be able to do in this lesson? Just quickly with the person beside you. Does that make sense? Please ask questions if you don't understand. Exactly, it doesn't really matter. Depends on what, you can decide the level. Does anybody want to volunteer what they would view as success in this lesson? Or why? Depends. Go on. First word.
Sorry, I spoke. I just felt that it depends on what the aim of the course is and what sort of course it is as to which of those things I would need them to be getting better at. One of my ex-students was sitting in front of me before this afternoon, and he said that his students come in with CAE, and his need for grammar and vocabulary is not great, so wouldn't be a measurable criterion for him, so probably everything else. Other things would be, and it also depends if it's an exam course where they're being specifically trained to jump through hoops.
Anybody else? Anything different? Yeah?
I would say certainly task achievement, but I'm not sure that I would look at grammar or lex. I'd be thinking more of organization and support, that you can move. I mean, you're going to have at least one big division in your essay between the advantages and the disadvantages. Do you know how to appropriately move from one to the other? And so kind of functional phrases. I might indeed look at speed, because I do a lot of trainings for people who are going to take timed exams. So
our primary focus when we look at success criteria is not that one person is right or one person is wrong. It's that we're saying the word, well, it depends. It depends on the context. It depends on the students. The course book is that one size fits all, but your lessons are not. Your context is not. So if we focus on success criteria, we have these kind of things we want to do, but we must consider that student has just arrived in class, that student has been here for 3 months, that student's ready to go to the next level, or that student is going to do an IELTS exam. So our success criteria is going to differ depending on the needs of the context. And this is really, really important to be able to put into place in terms of your system, because frequently the teacher judges their own behavior and their own performance based on that conformity of the course book and the student's ability to achieve what's put in the course book. Where if the teacher takes it back and thinks, actually, for each individual student, what am I trying to achieve with them? Then I can begin to think of my own reflection and what I am good at as a teacher and how I'm good at diagnosing students, how I'm good at reacting to certain things, how I'm good at actually teaching the language rather than the course book. So redeveloping your whole curriculum seems like a really drastic thing to do, but by reframing lessons like this, it's been so useful in being able to do planning sessions together where we all consider and justify certain classroom choices based on our own competencies, based on our own context. Now, I have another one for you, another challenge for you. Assessment of success was massive. So how am I going to assess success? And frequently, you know, that's where the lesson falls down, I suppose. Again, 3-minute conversation on the topic of traveling using question forms. So we have our learning outcome was a 3-minute conversation. The domain or the theme is travel, and the enabling language, the language that they're going to use in order to do that, is question forms. Really, really quickly with your partner, how are you going to see if they actually achieved what you wanted them to achieve? How do you know? 1 minute with your partner. So what we're looking at here is justifying classroom choices. We're looking at training and justifying certain classroom choices based on your beliefs, based on the realities of the context and the constraints of the context. If you've got 40 students in your class, probably monitoring really quickly is the most effective way to do that. It's maybe the only way to do it. If you've got third learner feedback, where you've got two people having a conversation and one learner reporting on the conversation, is probably the easiest if you know it's going to be effective. So maybe monitoring and third learner feedback are the most appropriate way to assess success in this lesson. But it's these conversations and it's these considerations. What do I want them to be able to do? What does that look like? And how do I know? Allowing ourselves to reframe our teaching like that, it makes our life so much easier. And then reacting to assessment. We're not going to look at that today. I'm not going to make you do that. Because frequently we go through this process where we say, I want them to do that. This is how they're going to do it. And this is how I know. And then you say, well, what if they don't? Oh, okay. Well, they do it again. So we have to, again, as a final step of our teaching, react. And maybe the reaction is going to come within that lesson, but maybe the reaction is going to come in the next lesson or something like that. But it's that consideration that we want each student to reach that next level in a certain area. So we have to be able to monitor, assess, set success criteria, and then react to the failure or not, or achievement in that success criteria. Okay. So we obviously have remedial strategies like reframing behavior, like focusing on behavior in a different context. Because your learning outcome, if you remember, the learning outcome here, to start and maintain a 3-minute conversation. That's our learning outcome. That's what I want the student to be able to do. Now, maybe they cannot use the question forms, or maybe they cannot talk about travel. So maybe I'm going to reframe the behavior. I'm going to say, actually, 3-minute conversation about your family, or about another topic which you're more comfortable with. So I'm assessing, can you actually do the 3-minute conversation, for example? Okay. Yeah, so this is, and Greed, I'll send this all on to you. I don't want you to start rewriting your curriculum now, don't worry. What we started with was a clear and usable set of learning outcomes appropriate for every level. So taking the CEFR and actually trying to cut and paste and rewrite some of them based on the needs in our context. So a clear success, clear learning outcomes. A set of typical topics. So travel, education, technology, depending on what you want your kids to do or what you want your exam candidates to do. And then enabling language, and this is your grammar, your lexis, and other areas. And this is what it looks like. So, for example, this is a typical Monday morning. It will be expressing agreement and disagreement in a conversation or debate. The topic is film, TV, and books, kind of entertainment. And the language they're going to use is expressions for disagreement and agreement. So, at the end of the lesson, the teacher wants the students to be able to express agreement and disagreement in a conversation or debate. The success criteria is very open here, because some of them are going to do it, you know, with a lot of fluency. Some of them are going to do it with a lot of accuracy. It's depending on what you actually want each student to be able to do, or perhaps students as a group to be able to do. Yeah. Okay. So typically in our context, the lesson would have been language fronted. So it would have had, it's flipped upside down. It would have had, today we're going to do expressions for agreement and disagreement. That's what we're going to do today. And we're going to talk about movies, TVs, and books. And how are we going to do it? We're going to do it as a speaking task. So the learners look at the thing and they say, today, at the end of today, I will know expressions for agreement or disagreement. It's that concept of the difference between I know something and I use something. So language knowledge versus language use, it's a complete reversal of that. Language knowledge suggests that when you do that 1-2-hour lesson on expressing agreement, disagreement, then forever you will know how to express agreement, disagreement in a variety of contexts. No, they look the exact same. But at the start of every single lesson, the teacher walks in, and in the corner of the board, they write the learning outcome, which is, it's already given on the notice board, but they write that learning outcome. And then at the end of the lesson, they revisit the learning outcome so the students can assess if they can do this or not. It's putting the emphasis for reflection back upon the students as well. And the students can begin to think, actually, I have to take control of my own learning. Different for kids. We've got adult learners mostly, teenagers. But no, the lesson looks exactly the same. But it means that utilization of the course book has become, from the teacher's perspective, they're using the course book in an informed way. They're not saying, Unit 1, Question 1. They're saying, this is what I have to achieve. How can selecting, adapting, editing aspects of the course, but how can this allow me to achieve that? Does that make sense? No, it looks the exact same, but the teacher is thinking about it differently. Any more questions? This is just what you wanted at 3:30 in the afternoon. So the learning outcome is communicated at the beginning, and the teacher is aware of the success criteria, and the learners are encouraged to create their own success criteria. Again, more for adults. The teenagers won't really do this. Okay, let's forget about that. I'm not going to make you do that. But what has this got to do with teacher development? So as I said, what we're focusing on, anchoring teachers within their own practice and allowing them to reflect upon what they do and what does success look like within their own context. It was startling for me how much teacher development was associated with the concept of what we're teaching, I suppose, and the concept of the curriculum and the course book, and how teachers couldn't assess their own competencies or couldn't reflect upon their own competencies accurately because they were looking at it within that course book framework. And within the framework of, well, I'm really bad at teaching Unit 5 because something. So by doing this, it allows people to actually put the onus back upon themselves from creating that learning outcome and the success criteria all the way through. Yeah, curriculum framework document. Curriculum framework document. Curriculum, school curriculum, yeah. Okay, okie dokie. The last one I'm going to look at is the concept of reflective inquiry. And this is based upon, based upon the curriculum change and how we can encourage reflection based on the curriculum frame. 4 of the events that we look like which are related to or need reflective inquiry, action research, supported experiments, professional development group, and things like taking field notes or evaluating lesson success, ghost observations or something like that. It depends from an institutional perspective or from a teacher's perspective how in-depth you want to go into a certain issue. Action research, typically the action research projects that we do typically last 3 months, and they have data collection, so they have framing the question, data collection. They have maybe 2 rounds of data collection, data collation, and then a presentation on what they did. And they're a strict 3-month program. The teacher gets to choose whatever they want to reflect upon, but they're given support by management, by trainers in framing the question and things like that. The PDGs, the professional development groups, are generally just groups which meet every 2 weeks, usually at lunchtime. And they choose the topic which they want to reflect upon. And they're given about 2 or 3 months. They can reflect upon a couple of different topics, but at the end of the 2 or 3 months, they have to do a presentation on what they reflected upon, what they did, and how perhaps their practice changed or didn't. So it goes from very structured to quite loosely structured, I suppose, in this context. But all of them are anchored in reflective questionnaires and constant reflection upon what you are doing and what you view as success within your own context. And therefore, they're anchored usually in competency frameworks. Any questions at this point? Yeah, I think I'm just going to jump through the professional development. I'll send you all this. Okay. So what is the point of the reflective inquiry? What's the point in these action research groups, these professional development groups? I guess the key one is that ethos of inquiry and reflection. If you've got a big culture change in an institution, if you're a manager, you're a trainer, you're a teacher, the more you begin to create that ethos of inquiry within the staff room and that reciprocal vulnerability in the staff room, then newer teachers coming in are going to feed off that. They're coming in saying, oh, people read books in this school, or people do ghost observations, oh, people have professional development groups, they sit and chat about things, or there are workshops where I'm encouraged to reflect upon my learning. So it does perpetuate after a year or 2 years or 3 years, it does perpetuate. It's just putting in that groundwork, expecting that implementation dip. The number 4, the other teacher development events have, so the bottom-up teacher development events, like action research, professional development groups, they actually help to streamline the more institution-centered events like workshops, because the teachers are coming in with their own reflection questions, and they're saying, well, actually, if we're going to talk about Lexis today, I have a question particularly related to my lesson on this area. So it helps the teachers to be able to reflect upon the institution, the top-down sessions. So, oh yeah. The last two things we do. I really like wedding cake workshops. Wedding cake workshops, if you come away with nothing else, wedding cake workshops. Wedding cake workshops are workshops which could be led by an expert or could be led by a teacher at the end of their action research program or during their action research program. And essentially it starts with probably about an hour of theory or kind of more of a presentation. And then there's a task given to the participants. And they usually have a week or 2 weeks, and they meet again for the second tier of the workshop, which is more focused on reflection upon the task. And then maybe there's another task, and then they meet again for further reflection upon the task. And the idea is that you're building in that reflection process into a workshop program. This can be done with smaller groups or bigger groups, but it's essentially a step-by-step encouragement into reflective inquiry. For you to begin to inquire about that particular thing that we've talked about in that workshop. They've been very useful. And the KS session, the knowledge share sessions, are essentially teachers sharing their own expertise, usually at the end of action research, reflective inquiry, or something like that. It's again that not moving away from experts, but trying to create new experts, or trying to encourage teachers to find their own expertise and to share their own experience. Again, reciprocal vulnerability as part of school culture. Okay, we're almost finished, don't worry. Hakuna Matata. Okay, but is there a point? So again, if you didn't pay any attention for the last hour, there's a small conclusion. Successful teacher development programs must include a blending of bottom-up and top-down. There must be some institutional involvement, typically because institutions have the money, institutions have the power, institutions have the expertise. And the institutions usually see the bigger picture, so they might want you to develop in a certain way. But there must be an encouragement and a support for teachers to get involved in their own development, and then for teachers to be given enough space and trust to reflect upon their own success and react to that reflection. The cultural development should be perpetuated, should be made clear in terms of your ethos, but also should be perpetuated throughout the institution. Support must be positive, not punitive. Frequently in teacher development programs, it's a case of you have to do this. This is part of your job requirement, which puts a bad taste in your mouth. And then encouraging and empowering reflective inquiry, actually allowing teachers or training teachers to be able to reflect appropriately rather than saying, this is what you did wrong in an observation, for example, and you must do something like this, or you must do better, because then it's punitive and it's not really allowing the teacher to take control of their own learning. Oh, I have my email address. It's not going to let me do that. There's just some pictures for you to reflect upon. If you want the slides or if you have any questions, please email me, cpd@CES Schools. I understand that was a huge amount of information for 2:30 on a Thursday. Thank you for kind of surviving and staying with me. The main thing I wanted to look at is there's a plethora. There's a huge amount of different tactics and different things that you could do as a teacher, a trainer, a manager. We've tried all of them. Some of them are successful in this context. Some of them are not successful. Some of them were pretty useful for some teachers and not. But the idea is to begin to think, actually, that works for me, or that doesn't work for her, or whatever, and to begin to take control of it yourself, I suppose. Thank you very much. Cheers. Are there any questions? No, everyone just wants to get out of here. Oh, no, you're next.